Hey guys, it's Ricer Boy, and I'm ready to mess with some more major bolts on my car that might make it undrivable for another month. So you're probably wondering why I'm starting this video off next to the Moped, since I know this isn't the best received thing I put on my channel, but getting done with that project over there requires doing this project over here. Because a couple weekends ago I took all the fairings off of it and painted them black since I wasn't a big fan of the silver and red color of this Chinese hunk. So I'm going to put that back together so that way if I mess up doing the spring install on that, I will have another thing that I can ride. Because even though it might seem a little bit ridiculous, I've actually been riding this thing around without any fairings on it for a little bit, because with Oklahoma state law, as long as you have turn signals and a headlight, it's basically street legal. So it meant that anytime I rode this thing in rain, without the front wheel arch, I basically just launched water into my visor on my helmet. So I'm going to put this thing back together, and then we could finally start tooling around in the Sentra to finally lower it. Then I figured if we are going to make this a little bit of a scooter update video, I did put something new on it, as you can see. So we stick the key in the ignition, flip it to on, turn the safety switch on. Check that out. That is a GPS speedometer that I added, so that way I can't be pulled over for going 14 over again. So now with the Moped looking all sweet with these fully black fairings, we are going to start by working on the rear suspension of the car, which means that we're going to jack up the beam axle, then put some jack stands under the car, and then we just have to disassemble the rear seat, so that way we can have access to the top of the suspension at the back. Also make sure to cop a sticker. They're $1 on Etsy. If the link in the description doesn't work, you can just search for it and it should pop up. So before we jack up the car, I might as well walk you through what I'm putting on it, because I am now going to install these Tanabe DF210 lowering springs and restore the current suspension by putting some new strut boots on my KYB shocks and adding some Tenacity top hats to the front and rear struts. And I bet you're already curious on why I decided to go with lowering springs instead of coilovers. But I think it's a pretty simple answer. Because when it comes to the Sentra Spec B, there's basically three main setups that people go with. There's Racelands, which are the cheap coilovers. There's Time Basics, which are a slightly better coilover at $500. And then there are the BC Racing coilovers with adjustable damping. Now the Raceland coilovers, honestly, I'm not too big on them because, they're known to be cheaper in quality, they're not really that adjustable. The Tyne ones still have an issue because for the rear struts, I believe they still use the same rubber top hat from the factory, which isn't really all that good for handling. And then with the BCs, you're already at $1,000. When it comes to me, I'm spending $300 for all the parts that I'm putting on in order to revitalize the current suspension, and the car is already on KYB XLG shocks, which is really good because even though it's designed to replicate the stock damping of the car, they're still better than stock, and I feel like I might as well get as much mileage as I can out of them, so that way it can not only improve the resale value by having me restore them, but so that way when I put sway bars on this thing, it'll actually make a difference, and I'll get a lot better money's worth than with coilovers. Because after all, this thing's still my daily. It's not a track car, although I wish it was. So as you can see, with the rear wheels out of place, getting the struts out really isn't that difficult. It just means taking out those two bolts that are at the top and the one bolt that holds it in at the bottom. Oh, there's one. There's the other one. Wow. I'm an idiot. I did not even have to disassemble the interior, and I did. Wow. So yeah, this is the first of the rear struts. As you can see, as it turns out, there are two nuts that actually connect the top on, that go like this, and then the bottom bolt is pretty simple. It's just in there real tight, so yeah, let's do the other side. And here's the other one. Look at that. So now we've decided to move outside because this is the part that most people consider dangerous when working with lowering springs. Because as you can see here, we have spring compressors, and what these things do is they actually clamp onto the side of the spring right there to keep it taut when we undo the top hat, which is a 14mm bolt on the top, as you can see right there. because we already took care of two 14 millimeters for these and a 17 at the bottom for this. So we just have another 14, clamp these springs and take this coil apart. So as you can see, this clamp locks in place on the spring, so that way it doesn't shoot off when you take the top bolt off of the coil. And there we go. That is our shock separated from our spring. Excellent. So now, with just the basic strut, this is what it looks like when I put that Tanabe spring on it. Looks pretty cool. Now, you just have to put the top hat on in the same order that it was with the original shock. So naturally, the order in which you place the parts is very critical to making sure that your suspension works properly. So starting with the strut, we have the regular strut, the dust boot, the bump stop, and then this big golden washer sort of thing. Then on the top hat, going from the bottom up, we have this interesting washer piece with the grooves in the side, which then goes through this plate with a metal sleeve that then goes into the cork-shaped one on the top. Then you put this washer on top of that, like so, and then we screw the nut on the top, which then links up with this and compresses the spring down, since the spring rests on this platform and this bottom groove right here. So then if you did everything right, this is what your final result should look like. You can notice the top hat has it where the hole is parallel with the side of the bottom of the strut. So this is parallel to the hole right there. This is what it looks like with all the new stuff on it. I'd say it looks pretty sweet. Perfectly restored suspension. So as you can see, I have the assembled strut back in the wheel well. However, I have not put the bolts and nuts back in it to attach it to the car, and that's because this lower bolt needs to be put in at 90 pound-feet, and these upper nuts, of which I got new ones since I stripped the old ones, need to be put in at 35 pound-feet. And now I know those specs because I got them straight from the factory service manual, which I would highly recommend you download because they have exploded parts diagrams of all the components on the car. So we put the 3 bolts in on both sides with the 36 foot-pound nuts at the top and the 90 foot-pound bolt at the bottom. So now we can put the rear wheels back on, put the rear of the car down, then do the fronts. So hopefully I framed this shot right, because now we're going to bring the car down for the first time ever, lowered on Tanabe DF210 lowering springs. So I think the rear of this car used to have 3 fingers of wheel gap. Now we're at about 1.5. I can't even get my second finger in there. It's just 1 finger. I mean, the fact that these springs haven't even settled yet means that I'm very impressed with these lowering springs. I mean, look at how low this car looks now. The fitment is almost perfect. So now with the front jacked up and with both the wheels off, we just have to take off those 2 bolts on the bottom and then those 3 nuts on the top. And then we're gonna have the front shocks out. So now, thanks to our friend Mr. Impact, we got the 3 12mm bolts up top off, as well as the 2 17s down here off. So now we'll be able to take out our strut once we bang out this line for the brake line. And I meant the clamp, not the line itself, because that wouldn't be good. So as it turns out, you can take out the tab for the brake line by literally pulling it out. Just get this tab part right there that extrudes, yank it out, then your brake line should come out of the clamp, like so, which then allows you to take the bolt out of your strut that you put back into it, which then allows you to take out your very first front strut. Haha! Here it is, dust and everything. This looks very old. So with both of our struts off, we do the same step that we did before of putting the spring compressors on the side of the coil. As you can see, I've tightened both of the clamps down so that way the spring does not expand as we take the top off, which is only held on by one 17mm bolt. So I'm going to do this outside then bring in the separated components once I'm done. So as you could see, the only components of the old strut that we're keeping besides the strut mechanism itself is the lower part of the top hat to the coil spring, which is this, and the rubber ring inside of it to protect the spring from scraping, as well as the 17mm nut at the top, since I don't have another one of these and it just makes sense to reuse it. Now obviously with my specific setup, I'm going to put on this new KYB SB101 strut boot with a bump stop, a new upper top hat, which includes this piece, the nuts that are on it, and this plastic ring where the lip part that you see, that lip, goes into the bottom like this so it fits flush. So now there's quite a lot less parts to this strut than with the rear ones. So obviously we get the strut boot, put the more lipped side on first, then put the bump stop cone side down on top of it and press until it goes over the bulge on the strut. Like so. Now after this, we get our spring, put that on over and line it up. Then we put our lower section of the top hat on. Now this is important. You need to line this triangle on the bottom part of the top hat up with the lower 2 bolt holes on the strut. As you can see, that's parallel with the point of this triangle. And then after you have that lower triangle lined up, you just center the point between the 2 shorter stubs on the topmost part of the top hat, and you put the arrow between that, and then you just put the nut on the top, and what you have is a totally revitalized strut. So now with your strut back inside the wheel well, you want to tighten your lower bolts to 90 foot-pounds and your upper bolts to 20 foot-pounds. Also, the bolt in the center of the strut is at 50 foot-pounds. Alright, here goes nothing. Lowering the front for the first time ever with the Tanabe DF210 lowering springs. I don't even know if I can get the jack out from under here. Whoa. Alright, that's the front fitment. Used to be 4 fingers of gap. Now with the suspension unsettled, it's barely 2. I think after driving on these springs, I'm probably going to have the perfect amount of low for this thing. At least for my opinion, since I am more of a show person for the low. Since that is the front, and that is the rear. I am overall very satisfied with this kit. And it was at that point that my camera died, so to keep you guys entertained, I'm going to insert a clip of me driving with the new suspension on in a point of view fashion to show you how good the car handles with it. And on that note, thank you for watching, and peace out.